Hello everybody, welcome back to Zach of Idea. I'm Zach.
I'm Michael.
We're watching the FNAF movie, but before we do that, we're gonna do the timeline so that we know what we're looking at.
I haven't been keeping up with Five Nights at Freddy's, so...
I kept up for quite some time, but I don't remember. So we're gonna be watching MatPat's Ultimate FNAF Timeline, even though apparently there's some stuff that people say is wrong or something. But since MatPat and Markiplier were the ones that got me into this series in the first place, that's what we're doing. Let's go.
Today we end the torment. 19 books, 11 games, 8 whole years, all leading to this moment. The ultimate FNAF timeline is finally complete. The pieces are in place. Now all we have to do is put the story,
I read the first two,
jealousy, and loss back together. This one is big, my friends, and I gotta admit, kinda nervous. I haven't attempted a timeline video on this franchise since 2018. Back in the days when Mike was the crying child, Afton coming back was actually a surprise, and Fazgoo wasn't a phrase I'd ever thought I'd have to utter. But since the last time I did something like this, we've had 3 more massive games, the death and revival of the FNAF movie, and more robot kids than you can
now the FNAF movie's out.
But when you look at the totality of this franchise, the story of FNAF really boils down to the story of one man, William Afton. His successes, his failures, his rise becoming co-owner of one of the most successful restaurant franchises in the world, and his eventual fall to the monsters he helped to create.
Looks like something you do on Paint.
I mean, probably was at the time.
That's why I've decided to split this timeline into 3 main chunks. The foundation of Freddy's, how the business started, and
I just know that it gets crazy. Like there's, I think there's like time travel or something at some point. Like it gets crazy.
The pizzeria simulator fight. And because there are lots of new big revelations in
I've heard that it's linked to like a real crime scene from a Chuck E. Cheese or whatever.
I originally wanted it to be one
but I don't know how
video, but it just felt
reliable
I
don't know that information is.
Once this, make sure that you subscribe. Without any more waiting, I present to you the story of a loving, obsessive father who slowly descended into madness, and along the way discovered the secret to eternal life.
Weird.
Our story begins
not what you'd expect.
1980s. It immediately said that this, Fredbear's, was a place where you could bring the family. And the price, honestly, couldn't be beat. For 50 cents, you could get food and entertainment as you watched
what would
the
50 cents be today?
dancing bear perform on stage.
It's a good question.
Normally, you only got to see dancing bears at large traveling circuses like Barnum and Bailey, where the tickets would go for about $1. That's $1 without food. But this was a smaller show.
God, a whole dollar without food? Nonsense.
Tickets would sell for just a mere
Oh, I've never seen $1. Take your hat off, son. That's $1.
William was inspired by the work of Walt Disney, who throughout the 50s and 60s was pioneering the use of mascot suits throughout his theme park. The big innovation? Suits with 5 fingers. This allowed the performers wearing the suits to use their natural arms and hands to interact with the guests, as opposed to the older models where the arms would just hang limply by their sides. Finally, with a simple mascot suit, he would be able to realize his childhood dream. He would be able to bring Fredbear to life, to appeal to the kids
waving
for copyright reasons.
Back in that day, to Mickey Mouse, and it's just standing there with its arms down.
Yeah.
But feeling like one character wasn't enough, he added another.
Gotta move like Kermit the Frog.
Enter Chica's Party World, a rival restaurant starring performing animal characters. His idea, except they did it better. William may have been the first, but obviously he wasn't the best. It hurt the prideful William Afton to admit it, but this restaurant was able to do the thing that he always wanted to do.
Purple guy turned blue.
Actually come to life.
Turning
all
red.
The performers in this restaurant were robots, simple metal skeletons that were powered by battery packs, but all of them able to freely turn and talk and dance on their own, no human required. It was like
Damn, in
magic,
the 30s,
magic
that's
that
crazy.
came from the mind of
Or
a brilliant
50s, I guess.
creator named Henry Emily. This Henry, in some small way, had been able to harness the power of life
Makes
itself.
sense.
Afton
Animatronics
admired
aren't really
him.
a
He was
thing
jealous,
anymore.
to be sure, but he also looked upon this man.
They could be
Off to
more
one side of
realistic
Chica's Party World
nowadays,
was a
but
small cabaret
Yeah.
stage featuring an elephant magician. On the other, a hippo known to ramble on and on. That one was more of a joke for the parents, but it was the main stage that was for the kids. A rocking band of characters featuring a yellow chicken thing with a southern drawl named Chica, backed by a band of other country
Forgot how
characters.
creepy the
Pig with a
Chica
banjo,
was.
an upbeat frog from the local swimming
Yeah, I think
hole,
that's.
and a brown
I mean, that's
bear
not normal
with a
Chica
heavy
though.
southern accent. Wait, A bear? But bears were his animals. Why not a cow or a horse? Something to fit the country theme a bit better. Why did it have to be a bear? And adding insult to injury, they had the nerve to call this thing Ned Bear, a direct copy of his own Fredbear.
Whoops, that's gonna leave a mark.
With the two franchises now merged into one, it was the best of both worlds. Afton's ideas with Henry's robotic expertise. The two men decided to launch under a new name, Fredbear's Family Diner, a pizza chain that would eventually come to feature a mix of humans in performing suits as well as on-stage animatronics. They decided to stick with Fredbear as the headliner, considering the yellow bear was easily identifiable as a brand and because he was the original performing animal mascot. Afton appreciated that. This new restaurant would also see a mix of characters as the two franchises merged into one, with Pig Patch and Happy Frog performing right alongside Fredbear and Bonnie. And as part of this one big Fredbear family, they even got themselves official merch.
Bonnie looks like a psychopath.
Masks to magnets.
The crappy Mr. Hippo fridge magnet?
That said, not all the characters were winners. The reception to some characters was just mediocre, so they faded away into the dumpster, storage units, and retro budget tech stores of lost nostalgia, waiting for their chance to step back into the limelight if and when a headliner went out of commission. Others, though, would fare much better, like a new Pirate Fox, as well as a blue guitar-playing variant of Yellow Bonnie Bunny. Ultimately, the franchise would get so big, it would spawn its own cartoon show, Fredbear and Friends. Business was booming. In 1983, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza launched, giving a dedicated home to all this new supporting cast of characters. Chica the Chicken, Bonnie the Blue Bunny, Foxy the Pirate, and of course the headliner, a brown Freddy Fazbear. Business was good, and Afton was happy, mostly. It did bother him that the one original character that he created, the one that he himself played, Golden Bonnie, got passed over for inclusion in that cartoon show. The only character in the roster of regulars to get ignored for the show, but other than that, things were going smoothly. He had himself a wife, 2 sons, a daughter. He had a thriving business, and best of all, he was able to learn the craft of robotics from the man that he both loved and hated, Henry. Next up, let's talk about those mascot costumes. One thing that I keep going back to is the design of Glitch Trap. It's a handcrafted suit. You can see the seams and everything. It even has 5 fingers for the performer's hands. It is very much not a Springtrap suit. This is something much more rudimentary. It came at a time before animatronics were a part of the story. That's why I suspect that it was actually the first, predating literally everything. It's also a suit that is very personal to Afton. He put his digital consciousness in that form. It's his personal avatar. It's the way that he sees
And that's where we're getting a crazy town, I guess.
Separate discussion about habits and rituals of serial killing.
Digital
So the fact that
consciousness
he
into a
lured
suit.
kids and killed them in this particular suit actually says a lot about his emotional attachment.
Ugh.
So while Fredbear
Terrifying.
seems to have started as someone else's creation, Golden Bonnie was
Mommy, there's a bunny waving at me.
personal connection. And that's not all. In this whole franchise, only
That's
one set of characters
nice.
Can we get
have
this pizza to go?
themselves the
Yeah.
Ned. Even Golden Freddy, Fredbear, was a 5-fingered wearable suit at one point in the story, as we see in this shot from the graphic novel, before he, like everyone else, was turned into an animatronic. As the Freddy Files Ultimate Edition says, it's important to revisit the beginning of Henry and William's relationship, so here you go. I think
Dude
this is
made
where it
so
begins.
much money
Also,
on
this
these
is Mr. MatPat,
games.
your
Oh my
contact.
god.
This one
And the games are free.
released
Like, at
there.
least, like, the
Encyclopedia
first
has backed up
6
all
of them are
this
free.
speculation. I've had this timeline written for
Yeah,
about
he has
a
all
month
these
now, but I've
books,
also
though,
been
too.
putting off a bit to see what
Yeah.
wrenches
And now he has the movie.
might throw into it. And on
Yeah.
this particular point, I gotta say, it seems like we might
And
actually
I'm pretty sure
nailed
they'd
it.
probably
They
be
actively
making more
call out the
movies if it
suspicious
was
similarities to the
good.
Fredbear crew.
Yeah.
One of the pages.
It was
Ned
very
Bear looks
successful.
like an imitation.
It's like one of the
Just
only
enough to avoid
horror
copyright.
movies that's ever gotten
I
an
don't know
A
about you, but
cinema
that seems to
score.
imply that we were right on
which
the
is
money.
crazy.
Knowing all of this,
It's
at
like
one
one
point,
of
the
2.
franchises had to have merged. That's really the only way that you get Mr. Hippo from the rival franchise as part of the Fazbear crew. This also mirrors a lot of what happened in the real-life history of Chuck E. Cheese, with 2 rival restaurants, each with their own casts of characters merging to become
Ew,
one
so
unified
freaking
brand.
creepy,
Again, we've gone into
dude.
that in detail in
Yeah.
other videos, just wanted to remind you all of that here. But why would I call out the rival restaurant as being named Chica's Party World? Few things, actually. First, we know for a fact that a location named Chica's Party World exists. It is mentioned in the source code teasing sister location, so it is out there somewhere and doesn't fit cleanly anywhere. Second, in the story The Puppet Carver, Chica is very explicitly looped in with the both versions of Pig Patch and Ned Bear, implying that she started as a mediocre melody. Thirdly, her design just fits better with the theme of down-home country animals with southern accents playing the banjo and eating with bibs. And with her being the headliner of the show with her name on the restaurant, it would make sense then that when the restaurants merged, she was the one that was added to the main cast of characters while all the other mediocres faded away. It's also why when Freddy's closes after William's killing spree, she's the one to branch back off into her old franchise and is therefore missing in Sister Location, a detail that's bothered me for years at this point. It might also explain why William decided to stuff his first dead kid into Chica. That one was Henry's creation, not his. Is all of this a big leap? Yeah. Is it connecting a lot of dots that are very spread out across the franchise that I've been holding on in the back of my mind for years? Absolutely. But I think it makes sense. Last time we covered the origins of Freddy's. We talked about William Afton's childhood dream project of making a singing bear come to life, and the infuriating moment that his dream is copied by a rival restaurant franchise looking to steal away his success. The merger of the two franchises results in William
So this is all
Henry, a
in the
brilliant
book.
designer with a knack for robotics.
This is
Working together,
across
they make
games,
Fred Bear's
books,
flourish,
all
spawning
that
popular
stuff.
Saturday morning
I feel like
cartoon
this
shows,
book is
toy
based
lines,
off
and
of
spin-off
a
restaurants
real-
under the
a
Fazbear
real
name.
thing.
When last we left him, Afton was thriving.
I
The world of robotics,
mean-
opening his eyes to new and exciting ways
I know
of
stuff
bringing
gets crazy in, like,
characters to
the
life. Bringing
fifth,
things to life.
sixth one.
Yeah, that was his core driving force. his
Where,
passion.
like-
and it was this very passion.
And there's
that
like
mutate,
people
twist,
passing
and
off
morph
as, or
from
there's
here on out
robots
the story.
passing off as
Because with
people in the
life,
second
there's
book.
inevitably death. Something that Afton
Like the one that I've read the first two books, and there's like a person that you think is just a human the whole time. Turns out that she was an animatronic. It's crazy.
Things are about to get dark in a hurry.
The Afton era.
That the deaths
1983,
begin.
Business was booming with two whole restaurant franchises running: Fredbear's Family Diner and the newly opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Together,
Yeah, I
William
don't know.
and Henry
I think I'd go to Freddy
embraced
Fazbear's
the idea
Pizza.
of
There's a
making
better
it real.
ring to
They
it.
called their new invention
Yeah.
the Springlock suit, and fittingly enough, it was symbolic of the partnership between these two men. A human suit as designed by William that could become a freestanding Henry-style robot. But because it was still new tech with kinks to work out, the rollout was limited, restricted only to the Fredbear's Family Diner location. All of this meant that William was busier than ever. He didn't have time to be a full-time parent. so he
Springtrap
designed a
reminds me
nanny
of
cam system where cameras and
a name
speakers
of,
were
like,
in throughout the
freaking
neighborhood,
thing
as well
from
as in
Saw.
his youngest son's favorite toy,
Yeah.
Psychic
Another
Freddy
movie,
Fredbear.
but
I mean, plushy
just
Fredbear.
Springtrap
in general.
Trying to get out.
He also left childcare duties to his eldest
jaw
son,
is
Michael.
not
There's
as-
just one problem with that. Michael was far from the best babysitter. He tormented
Pretty sure
his
that
younger
was
brother
one.
by jump scaring him with a foxy mask and constantly left him behind. William watched all of it from
Yeah,
his camera.
it was.
Like second movie or third movie?
It was
Except
in
Michael's
a few of them.
torment
It was in the
didn't
first
stop. Bitter,
movie.
angry
Those
thoughts
movies
And then the
came
last
to
movie, you
mind.
finally get
Why
to
did
see it
he
go
have
off.
to be the one to take care of this whining crybaby all the time? It just wasn't
Oh,
fair.
I say the
It was
last
time
movie,
that
the
he
seventh
got
movie,
even
'cause
with
they've
his
made
brother
movies
by
since
playing
then.
the ultimate
I think
prank.
it was like
A prank
15.
that just so happened to be on this crying
I
child.
think
He and his
Saw
friends would
10
take his
just came
scared
out.
little brother and make him do the one thing that he was terrified of.
So his
doing,
son was a
getting close to
crybaby.
animatronics.
Yes.
That would be embarrassing for the kid that was such an embarrassment to him. His brother squirmed, screamed, kicked, and fought, but just as they were putting that small, squirming boy up to Fredbear's lips, the mouth snapped shut. The sensitive spring locks inside the body had been triggered by the boy's movements, and they'd immediately clamped down. The wriggling stopped. The boy went limp, but it was just a prank. It was meant to be funny. The boy was taken to the hospital and was immediately given an IV. Flowers and pills filled the nightstand next to his hospital bed, but the damage was too severe. He couldn't recover. As the younger brother's consciousness began to fade, he could hear Michael's last words, a small and flimsy apology. But his father, Williams, through the voice of the Fredbear plush, were a firm and committed promise to a dying son. You're broken. I will put you back together. This would not be the end. No matter what, William's son would live again. It would just take time. Time that, right now, he just didn't have. His young son's heart flatlined as the boy faded into the inky unknown.
Man, you're an awful
In
brother.
the aftermath of the tragedy, changes started happening around the restaurants. Kids were
What,
now
you've never
required to wear
accidentally
security
killed your
wristbands to
brother?
prevent anyone from
No,
getting
I don't
outside
think so.
without prior permission. Any kid who approached
Okay.
the exit without permission
We
would
can't
have
all
to
be
answer to
you.
the security puppet, a marionette on strings that could fly around on rails across
Oh,
the
yeah.
restaurant to
I
stop
remember
kids
that
in their
one.
tracks.
That one was
It
freaking
Williams'
creepy.
idea, inspired by Michael constantly leaving the restaurant without his brother. In the wake of Fredbear's springlock failure, all the hybrid suits were getting retired, locked away at the nearby Freddy Fazbear location. It was yet another tough pill to swallow after all the hard work that he and Henry had put into them. William would eventually bury the boy's small body in a remote location out in the woods right alongside his drive into and out of work every day.
I
The
think
death
that's
of this
illegal.
little boy sent the
Yeah.
family spiraling. His wife, crippled with grief, was so distraught that all she could do was sit and watch TV.
And she lost her hair.
Michael was far worse,
never had
complaining
hair.
of seeing hallucinations of a golden bear standing outside of his window. The boy was so racked with guilt that he was convinced that he was being haunted by the ghost of his brother stuck inside the suit that took his life. The suit's three-toed feet digging into the
But
wet
he
earth.
didn't
The words,
bury
"It's me,"
his
ringing
son
through Michael's ears. Some nights,
outside.
Michael would even go so far as to break
It was
out
the
of
pet
his room and
cemetery.
rape
Paid his
Make sure that
son
his
in an
brother was still there.
animatronic.
As for William
Oh,
himself,
no.
he disappeared into his work and his drinks. Drunk and angry, William raced back to the restaurant to give Henry a piece of his mind, only to find
Man
someone
loves
else
purple.
waiting. Henry's daughter, Charlie, locked outside of the building, bullies laughing at her through the window. Fine, some other problem to fix. But then Afton got an idea. A beautifully awful idea. This was his chance to get back at the man that had humiliated him all those years ago. Henry had killed his business, and now Henry's robotic suit had killed his son. It was time for William to do some killing of his own. Let Henry feel what it's like to have something you love get ripped away. While parties continued inside the walls of the pizzeria, William attacked Charlie in the back alley. It felt good. He felt free. The years of resentment and bitterness trapped in his heart finally released in a moment of pure unapologetic
It's so
evil.
weird that
He
this is a
would
children's
make
game.
Henry hurt like he hurts. And in that moment, William became a killer.
I remember seeing like kids walking by with like FNAF backpacks and stuff, and it's just like, man, that is so wild.
FNAF t-shirts.
Yeah.
Charlie's death would remain on the books as a random act of violence. And though Henry had suspicions about William, there was no physical
So he
evidence.
killed
nothing that could
Henry's
link him back to
daughter.
the crime. In the weeks that followed, Fredbear's Family Diner would close for good. 2 high-profile deaths around the restaurant with
I
2
read that
grieving
book.
owners in such a short period of time. Was just too
And
much
see,
bad
she was a
press.
character in the
Besides, Freddy
books that,
Fazbear's was
like,
still open, and it
she's
was
like the
a
main
restaurant
character of the
anyway.
books, and then she turns out to be an animatronic because she was killed at this point. And you didn't find that out until like the end.
2 uneventful years. The first of these experimental projects was a secret workshop under his house, a veritable bunker, which allowed him to work while still monitoring his kids via hidden security cameras. 1983. A passcode that served as a constant reminder of why the cameras were so important, why he was down there in the first place. This was all to fulfill the promise that he had made to his son, right? I will put you back together. This was for him, all for him. Right? But cameras weren't enough. He needed to solve the runaway Michael problem. He had to keep him in the house. He couldn't have another one of his kids wind up dead inside of an animatronic suit. So why not run a little experiment on Michael? You see, all this work with Henry had gotten Afton.
Just
to
get rid
start
of all
learning
your
more about
kids. It's
life,
really easy.
robots, the
Just
human
feed 'em to
mind, and
robots.
What a fallible machine we as humans were. Our reality is so easy to manipulate with a few sensory deceptions. Deceptions like sound. With just a few sounds, he had discovered that he could alter a person's vision. He could transform blank, smooth plastic robots into lumbering, twisted nightmares. Nightmares far scarier than he could create with actual materials. They would appear organic, rotting, putrid, terrifying. These would be his means of keeping his son Michael in the house where he belonged. Was it extreme? Maybe. But then again, this was the boy who had killed his son. He would make him sorry. And so Michael would grow up not only dealing with the memories of his own guilt, the hospital room, the pills, the flowers, the death of his brother, but also facing literal nightmares, illusions created by sound. Michael
Crazy.
would never forget these either. Years later, as a security guard, he would still draw pictures of them inside of his logbook. But all of these extra projects meant that his home life suffered even more. He was an absent father and a non-existent husband, leaving his wife cold and alone.
Why do you hide inside your walls when there is music in my halls? All I see is an empty room, no more joy, an empty tomb.
And despite her repeated demands that he leave his office and engage with the family, he refused time and time again, leaving her no choice but to leave.
You burned down my house?
You call that a house? It was like a morgue in there. You need to see your son.
The baby isn't mine.
Well, how's this? I'm keeping the diamond ring.
And through it all, there was one lingering
Okay.
feeling. William wasn't done. He had gotten a taste of what it felt like to be
I think that was from
what it felt
FNAF
like to be
6.
free. Charlie's murder had unlocked something in him, and he wanted more. June 26th, 1985. Putting on the golden Bonnie suit, he lured children one by one to the back room of the pizzeria when no one was looking. At first, he was cautious. He would lure them with promises of cake and cookies. He told them that their dog had died. He would ask for help with homework. Susie
Your
was
dog died. Come here.
What's my dog doing here?
I killed your dog. Come look at him.
He He couldn't sneak out. Someone would see him. He had to hide them in a place where they'd never be found and where they'd never leave the building. They had to be stuffed inside of the suits. No one maintained those things anyway except for him. And so Susie would go into Chica. Fritz, Jeremy, and Gabriel would come next, but it was easy. It was too easy. And with each little life he snuffed out, his lies got bigger. Their house was burning. They're just being kidnapped. Until the last one where all pretense was off. He let himself get violent. Too violent.
I'll just wait for him after school, throw a bag over his head, hit him with a shovel, and drag him into the back of my car.
The body of Cassidy was far more bloody and broken than any of the others. He'd let
Whose
himself
voice
go
was
too
that,
far.
though?
That one?
William Afton sounds like a woman.
He shoved the body into the one suit that remained backstage. The long-forgotten yellow Fredbear, now broken and discolored with age. Broken, like Cassidy was broken, like his son was broken. Newspapers reported on this disappearance, naming the whole thing the missing children's incident. Police would even charge William with the crimes after finding security footage of the golden mascot suit luring kids to the back, but they couldn't convict him. They had no bodies, and his face had been hidden behind the mascot suit the entire time. What they had was circumstantial at best, and so he walked away.
I remember the game.
But Henry,
Oh crap! Get off that camera.
Yeah.
Check this camera.
Exactly.
He would go back in the one place that they would least suspect him, a lowly day shift security guard. And there it was, buried in the back of parts and services, mixed in with the old withered animatronics, was the golden rabbit. With the yellow security badge still on his chest, he used his crank to pull open the spring locks. It was time for Bonnie to give an encore performance.
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right. From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available.
1987, 5 more kids. He didn't know what felt better, getting back into the suit after 2 long years of waiting, or knowing how devastating this would be.
How many
to
kids is
Henry
that?
the
10?
next morning. He didn't even try to hide his crime this time, just meant more blood on Henry's hands. He'd failed to protect the kids again. The restaurant had only been open for a few weeks, but William was sure that this would get it to close. Good. If he couldn't have Freddy's, no one would. Whenever a new
How did they even let, like I can see if a 6th one was to happen, there's no way a 7th one would happen. Like, that's crazy.
Withered animatronics. They had been
The place would have shut down far before 5
It
happened.
was almost like those old robots were trying to save the kids. Save them? They couldn't, obviously, but still, how were they moving? It was almost like they had been given life somehow. Did he have something to do with that? The following day, the news would report a security guard getting bitten by one of the animatronics during the day shift. Was that bite meant for him? William's curiosity was stronger now than his bloodlust. He had to learn more, but how? There was no way he'd ever be able to get inside another Freddy's pizzeria. Heck, there was practically no way a Freddy's would ever open again. He needed to create something new, something brand new. He needed to create his own pizzeria.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
Circus Baby's Pizza World. This would be
the
the place
creepiest
where he could
one.
continue his work. No longer just murdering, experimenting. He needed more kids, and he needed them alive. And knowing that he couldn't show his face on the restaurant floor,
forgot about
he
those
needed a
little
way of
doll
remotely
things.
capturing his victims and preserving them for his work. With that goal in mind, he designed a new breed of animatronic. Their endoskeletons fluid and flexible. He equipped them with sound lures that could mimic voices. They
That's
could isolate
right,
children.
I
They could
remember.
incapacitate and contain them with zero direct input from him. It was brilliant. He was brilliant. Far beyond the simple bars and wires of Henry's designs. And the characters he chose for this were uniquely his. His new roster wasn't going to be tainted by Henry's disgusting barnyard bird. Instead, it was back to his characters, his creations. Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, as well as 2 special ones. The first, Ballora, was an homage to the woman who left him. Now she would never leave him again. The second, the titular baby, was designed with
sex
his
robot.
baby in mind. Elizabeth, his youngest child. She would always be Daddy's little girl, the one that listened to him, the one that obeyed until the day that she didn't.
Daddy,
Yeah.
why won't you let me play with her?
Why is she
So
British?
pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
They live in Utah. Why is
The
she
day before
British?
Circus Baby's Pizza World opened, she disobeyed. She didn't listen. Left alone with Baby, she got too close. The animatronic ripped in half and swallowed her whole. A scared and confused child fading into eternal darkness. By the time Afton found her, it was too late. She was gone. He immediately canceled the launch of Circus Babies under the guise of a gas leak. But wait, as he sat there at the foot of the stage, he noticed that something was different. The eye color of the robot had changed. Baby had been built with blue eyes, but now they were emerald green, the same color as Elizabeth's. Was she in there? Could this all be connected to the free-moving animatronics that he had seen at Freddy's? He had to know more. His mourning turned to excitement. He had to return to where it all started. 1993.
It's so weird because you hear this stuff, it's like, it's hats on hats on hats. It's like not a thing you're supposed to do, but this thing is just that. It's just like, robots that are also haunted, that also can give you immortality, that also, like, it's crazy.
It started in the 30s, so right now we're at about 60 years.
Yeah. The metal had to be the secret. It had to contain the remnants of life itself.
And it goes to the future too.
Leaping out of a room that was invisible to the
I think it's like 2020
the oversized robotic skeletons back to his underground.
It's probably the past
back
now.
To where Circus Baby watched on with glowing, curious eyes. Eyes that somehow felt alive. Not knowing what else to do, William melted the robotic parts down. 5 animatronic endoskeletons reduced down to one silvery puddle of goo. Could he transfer this living metal to his own creations?
See, now that's really weird.
He picked up a syringe and filled it with the molten metal and injected the goo into Funtime Freddy's twisted, wiry endoskeleton. And suddenly, the coils came to life. Like snakes writhing in a pile, what had once been cold, lifeless metal moved and jolted on its own. He'd done it! He had unlocked the secret to life itself. Except something was clearly wrong. The movements were erratic. They were violent, angry. Baby didn't act this way. She had been calm, collected. This was clearly something else. Something mindless and frantic. Perhaps by mixing the souls and then portioning them out, he had created incomplete beasts. He would need to keep testing to truly understand it. He needed more of this remnant. As he searched the old pizzeria one more time for any remaining scraps of metal, the ghosts attacked. His past victims come to collect their due, all led by Cassidy. The 5 lined up and blocked the door. And Afton's mind reeled.
Love the little Atari mini games.
Real ghosts that he could see all standing against him. But what could they do? What couldn't they do? He panicked as Cassidy approached. How do you stop something that's already dead? Maybe with the thing that resulted in their death in the first place. He would get into his suit like old times. He would regain his power over them just like the day that they died. He was the genius. He was the one in the suit. He was the one in charge. The spring lock snapped into place. Maybe it was his frantic movements. Maybe it was the leaky, abandoned restaurant. Maybe it was just fate coming to collect its due. He didn't know. The only thing he did know was that his brain was suddenly filled with searing white-hot pain as hundreds of metallic pins and gears stabbed into his body from all sides. All he could do was collapse, blood slowly oozing out of the suit and pooling onto the floor around him. It couldn't end like this. It wouldn't end like this. His work was unfinished. Unable to move, his only option was to survive, to live, to keep living. It took days lying in his own blood, but eventually someone found him. A security guard making a normal report. When he saw the animatronics torn apart in the middle of the party room floor, it caused him to file an immediate report of a break-in. An owner would have to come in and claim the damage. And who else would it be other than Henry? Hope jumped in Afton's heart. Henry would see him. They were partners after all. He would be the one to help save him, to get him out of this suit, to relieve him from this tremendous pain. Henry entered the secret room. His eyes fell on Afton sitting there in the pool of red. And
Still
Henry,
alive?
saying nothing, turned and walked away.
This is just to inform all employees that due to budget restrictions, the previously mentioned safe rooms are being sealed at most locations, including this one. Nothing is being taken out beforehand, so if you left anything inside, then it's your own fault. Management also requests that this room not be mentioned to family, friends, or insurance representatives.
And so there Afton would sit, hanging on for 30 years.
Well, I think you gotta probably mention that to some people.
That refused to die. Last time we covered William Afton's rise as a serial killer. How the loss of his young son in 1983 caused him to make one fateful promise that would ultimately serve as his driving force for decades. I will put you back together. Fueled by grief and obsession, Afton would lose himself in work and drinks. One night in a fit of rage, he lashes out against Henry's young daughter Charlie, his first murder. This moment becomes the first domino to fall in a long sequence of events that ultimately destroys William's life and the lives of those around him. That one murder gives Afton a taste for blood, resulting in the deaths of 10 more children across 2 different pizzerias. Those children go on to possess animatronics, giving Afton his first exposure to Remnant and the potential solution for bringing his son back to life. The need to learn more about this miraculous power.
Oh, see, he's just trying to bring his son back to life.
As well as their captured.
Not my daughter, just my youngest son.
The heir.
There was one thing that he didn't account for: his daughter's curiosity. He made the robots too appealing, and it would cost him Elizabeth's life. Now with 2 children to put back together, Afton was more
Oh, he's gonna
desperate
put her
than
back
ever,
together too.
returning to defunct pizzerias to steal the possessed metal still living inside their walls. What he didn't account for, though, were the ghosts, forcing him to pay for the sins of his past. When last we left him, William was spring-locked, bleeding to death behind a secret wall. Gone, but certainly not forgotten. William still wasn't back. Weird. Michael knew his father sometimes traveled for work, disappearing for days on end, but usually there was some sort of notice, a phone call, a post-it, something. It's not like Michael and his father were close, far from it, but as a household of 2 suffering men coping with years of tragedy and loss, there was at least some element of communication between the 2 of them. They were united by a name and a shared pain. This time, though, things felt different. William had left nothing. His absence was longer. There were no check-ins, no updates, just silence. Something had happened. If there was one thing Michael knew about his father, it was that he had contingencies, safety checks, backup plans. His father was a careful and guarded man. He held his cards close to his chest, and as such, William had prepared him in the event that something like this ever happened. Normally, his father kept his home office locked, but in the event of an unexpected, prolonged absence, Michael had been instructed to enter his father's office and look behind an empty set of shelves mounted in the corner of the room. Rolling his eyes, Michael entered the office. Never fully understood how William was able to spend so many hours of his days locked up in here. There was just nothing to do. Most of this place was empty. He dragged himself over to the shelf in the corner, expecting to find an emergency contact list, a family safety deposit box. But what he actually found there was completely unexpected.
Father, it's me, Michael.
It's you!
I found it. It was right where you said it would be.
The shelf swung open and revealed a giant industrial elevator, one that led straight down into an underground bunker. But that was impossible. Hidden inside his childhood home was a secret entrance to an enormous underground science lair? It didn't make any sense. Seriously, it didn't make any sense.
For real.
And yet here it was, mapped directly underneath the floor plan of the house that he'd grown up in, lost his brother in, been tortured in. Michael thought that he'd known his father, a prideful, sad, angry man with petty, everyday problems, but clearly he'd been living with a stranger this entire time. His father had secrets. Suddenly, the days of William being locked inside of his office made sense. He'd been here the entire time. Where was here, though? Was this Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals? The Circus Baby restaurant always did seem to be a deeply personal project for Father, a failure of his that cut unusually deep, especially after that first location had to be closed prematurely due to the gas leaks. After that day, Father really did seem to change, to lose himself even more in his work. Clearly, the entrance he had found was some sort of secret back way into the facility, one that required crawling through vents to navigate. His father had been working here, but in secret. Why? And that's when he found her. At the end of the facility, Circus Baby, his father's pride and joy. Except something was different about her. She wasn't like the others. The way she talked, the stories she told. This wasn't just a robot. She was alive somehow. And not only was she alive, she also felt familiar.
There is something bad inside of me. I'm broken. I can't be fixed. Will you help
It's a
me?
child inside of you.
William's baby girl? But how? Why? What was this place? He dug around some old files and found blueprints outlining the features of these animatronics. Storage containers, voice mimicking, parental tracking. And was that a child in Freddy's stomach? Was his father collecting and experimenting on kids? Were all the rumors that he'd heard throughout his past actually true? That the animatronics came to life at night? That there were murders done in all the pizzerias? That his father had somehow been the prime suspect in all of it? Suddenly, Michael's mind flashed back to his persistent nightmares throughout his childhood. Had he been experimented on too? Tears stung in his eyes as anger, fear, and confusion filled his body. His father's secrets were pouring out. William wasn't just a lame, overworked father. He was a monster, toying with life itself. Suddenly, everything clicked. He frantically looked around the room, blinking human heads on poles staring back at him. Green eyes, his sister. Blue eyes, his brother. Closed eyes, his mom. All just staring expectantly. These were meant to be human. William was working down here trying to make believable humans, literally rebuilding the family that they had both lost. The small little girl robots with their British accents roaming the hallways of this underground facility suddenly took on a whole new context. Were those meant to be his sister? A replacement for her? A clone? Was William building clones of his sister? They seemed to know him, after all, to react to his presence.
They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
He always did have a bit of a
So they moved to Utah from Great Britain during the Great Depression and came to the United States and was like, well, darn it.
They wouldn't have British accents if it was that long.
Remnant of the humans that they once were. They needed to be rescued.
They always put us back inside. There's nowhere for us to hide here.
Led by the voice of Circus Baby, he marched through the now empty halls of the Funtime Auditorium. He would lead them. He would protect them. And finally, he would be able to forgive himself for the killing of his brother so many years.
So the restaurant was under their house.
No, it was a rental place.
Scooper? That
done got
violent
scooped.
extraction arm? Michael had seen that one in the pile of blueprints. Something about heat rendering the magical silver metal inside useless. In reality, prior to getting himself spring-locked and put behind the wall, William's methods had become increasingly sophisticated. With a mechanized arm that could infuse new bodies with a soul, William could finally give and take away life. The only thing he needed were the bodies. But William wasn't the only one looking for bodies, as Michael was about to learn.
But if we looked like you, then we could hide. If we looked like you, then we would have somewhere to go.
Michael was going to be the hero to help these animatronics, all right. He was going to help the haunted tubes and wires of these animatronics escape, just not in the way that he anticipated. His sister had lied to him, another game of pretend. The scooper plowed forward, digging its extraction arm into his body. As he heard his bones ripping through his flesh, Michael blacked out.
Something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not.
For the next several months, Michael's life was not his own. He was forced to comply with the tangle of wires and spirits that lived inside of him. His body felt like an overfilled balloon begging to burst as day by day, week by week, his flesh began to sag and discolor. He was a walking, talking, rotting corpse, alive, but wishing he wasn't. He was a puppet, a walking shell. And while he did his best to conceal his fate, there was only so much
People's
man
faces.
filled with robots to do. The entity in his innards would eventually leave, but by that point, the damage had been done. His decaying flesh stank, turning him into a literal purple guy. But still, even with no bones, even with rotting purple flesh and begging to die, Michael continued to live. That silvery metal remnant injected by the scooper meant that he couldn't die. His anger also refused to die.
Wild.
What he had seen down there in his sister's location had rocked him to his core. His father had killed and captured dozens. His experiments had killed his sister and then tortured him throughout all his childhood. He was actively trying to build human replicants. He didn't know where his father was, but Michael knew that he was out there somewhere.
Dead.
Living in
Well,
shadows. There is only one
not dead.
thing left.
An
Unfortunately,
animatronic.
not dead.
An animatronic behind a
Michael
wall.
had to correct for the sins of his father. He had to make things right. Michael would burn Fazbear Entertainment to the ground. I mean, what else could you do when your skin was permanently purple? Michael's strategy was simple. He would apply for night security guard positions at the old defunct pizzeria location.
But
That
Josh
way no one
Hutcherson
ever had to
isn't
see him
purple.
or smell him during his shift.
Well,
and all these old
then I guess I don't believe in the movie.
and squatters were always looking to get inside these abandoned buildings, and yet no one ever really wanted to work an overnight graveyard shift unless they were
He
practically
better
on
turn
top
purple by the end.
He would take on the job of security guard.
I think he is Mike, but he's a
No one
different
was able to follow his paper
Mike.
trail. Once inside, he
I mean,
tampered with
that's
the
possible.
animatronics,
Mike is
figure
a
out
very
writing about his
Common name.
common name.
While there, he would listen to the old tapes where upper management awkwardly welcomed new recruits to their summer jobs, even though he was working there nowhere near the summer months. He heard the gory
Mike
details
Schmidt.
of his father's franchise from the outsiders looking in, confused and afraid about what was happening in the walls around them. Sometimes he would see his brother in the form of the golden Freddy suit. It's me appearing on the walls around him. Except now, there was something else there. He was no longer alone. Another angrier presence was also in the suit, as if two spirits were forced to share the same body. And Golden Freddy would attack him now. It was aggressive. Its vengeance wanted to lash out at anyone with the Afton name, anyone who wore a security guard outfit. Over time, Mike worked his way through the old restaurants, the original pizzeria, the bigger, better Freddy Fazbear's. He spent weeks there looking for clues as to his father's whereabouts. And each time at the end of his week shift, he would then set the location on fire. Remnant can't survive high temperatures after all. So burning away whatever spirit-laden animatronics that still existed inside seemed like a winning strategy. All this revisiting of his past, though, was causing the nightmares to begin again. Hallucinations that brought him back to his childhood. The guilt around killing his brother. His dreams were oddly mixed with the shrill phone calls of the security guard. months. But it would all be worth it in the end. The goal was to eventually stumble across the one location, the one job that would finally reunite him with his father. Little did Mike know that that day would come sooner than he expected. 2023, an advertisement came across Mike's TV. Fazbear Frights, a new horror attraction inspired by the awful crimes that occurred around Freddy Fazbear's Pizza so many years ago. It made Mike sick. People looking to make a quick buck off the tragedy of others, off his own family. This wasn't a joke or entertainment. Regardless, he had to be a part of it. If this team was combing through his family's history, they might stumble across something that could be useful. And if his father was truly still alive as he suspected, there would be no way that he wouldn't show up here. Maybe finally this could be the final chapter in his family's marathon of tragedy. Mike applied for the job and was immediately handed the keys. Years of doing this had taught him that security guards rarely receive thorough security checks. He also liked
Looks human? Question mark?
On the field for the job. What little they knew.
Hey, glad you came back for another night. I promise it'll be a lot more interesting this time.
For weeks, there was nothing. But just as Mike considered giving up, he received the call that he'd been waiting
That's
for
right, this is...
years.
Oh no, this is 3.
We found one, a real one.
Could this finally be him? Sure enough, there he was.
Yeah, this is
William
3.
inside his iconic golden Bonnie springlock suit. Only now it was green and decaying with age. And there they were, a small family of broken men finally reunited. It's been a long time, Dad. Mike
Springtrap was always the one where I'm like, yeah, that's pretty spooky. I don't like the way that he moves in the game. Because it used to be just like these little gifs where it'd be the thing jumping at your face. And then, like, whenever you see him actually move, it's like, whoa. It feels
ultimately they were
creepier, I guess.
More annoying than anything else. But there was one that felt different from the others. One that was more than just a mere phantom. The security puppet. If he looked at the cameras at just the right moment, he could see it floating there through the halls. He could even see its reflection in the water pooled on the ground. It would seem like he wasn't the only one there on a mission. While he was dealing with Springtrap, Michael assumed that this one was likely dealing with the spirits of this place, finally setting them to rest. Hopefully this means a happier day for all of us, Mike thought to himself. And in that moment, he felt the air around him release, like pressure being let out of a bottle. The building sighed, as if 5 spirits had finally been allowed to move on. He had the sense that his brother was a part of them. He rigged the wiring inside the building to misfire, and the dry, desiccated walls erupted in flames. It is finished. Except, it was not. Somehow,
more money to
the
make.
sheer force of will have to remain. He had survived, and Mike would need to find a new way of finishing off his father. Luckily, the solution would present itself later that year. Not from Mike, but from another victim that had been left in his father's wake.
We're talking about becoming a Fazbear Entertainment franchisee, restaurant ownership and management, something almost anyone can do with a limited degree of success. You are now the face.
A limited
of the
degree of
newly
success.
branded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Fazbear Entertainment as a brand had been closed for years. William had been stuck in a suit and a wall. The only person who legally could bring the franchise back was Henry, but he'd largely pulled out of the franchise around the time of his father's disappearance. Something was up. Surely this had to be some kind of a trick, right? Mike, doing what he did best, applied for a franchise and immediately got the job. There was just one thing out of the ordinary. Paragraph 4.
If you are playing this tape, that means that not only have you been checking outside at the end of every shift, as you were instructed to do, but also
Yeah, this
that
is
you have
6.
found something that meets the criteria of your special
The last one that I played any part
No
of.
employment contract he'd ever signed required him to keep special lookout for independently moving animatronics outside the restaurant. Now he knew something was up here. Henry was luring them all back. Rather than trying to go to them, like Mike had done for years, Henry was doing the opposite. He was putting them all under the same roof. He was finishing them off for good. Mike knew this wasn't meant to be a restaurant. It was meant to be a prison. Containment vessel, a locked box meant to trap them all in so they could finally end the madness. It took a few nights, but eventually everyone was there. His father, the puppet, the robot spaghetti that had once violated his body, and his sister, now hopelessly devoted to serve the man that had once gotten her killed. It was time. He had been instructed to seal the doors and leave, but while he locked everything down, he didn't move on. If this was truly meant to be the end, if the remnant needed to be washed away, he needed to be a part of that.
This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace and perhaps more waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So Don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
And with that, it was over. The Afton legacy died with all of them trapped inside of a literal box.
And 50 years later, they're on a spaceship.
It's like Jason X.
Yeah.
Open and waiting for him. Something or someone wouldn't allow him to move on. Instead, he found himself locked in moments from his past. The pizzeria, his son's room, his underground bunker. It was as if his brain's neurons were all firing at once, overloaded, mixing and matching all his biggest fears, regrets, failures. What was this place? How did he get here? He called out into the silence.
Purgatory.
Then they started coming. Without warning, animatronics, both new and old, began to jump out at him, bite him, rip him limb from limb. The pain was immeasurable. Make it stop. Make it stop. William, for the first time, longed for death, an end to this torture. Just as it felt like he couldn't take it anymore, everything was quiet again. It was as if the world had been reset. There was a brief moment of quiet, and then the onslaught began again. Dozens of faces from his past, all focused on a waking nightmare that he couldn't escape from. More pain, more ripping. His own personal hell, but why? Why couldn't he just die? And then he saw
on Foxy, that's funny.
Characters he never thought he'd see again. Those janky, stolen characters that had started everything. The mediocre melodies. It had all started to go wrong once they showed up. Once Henry had made them. But mixed in with their obnoxious southern drawls, William heard something else. It was barely a whisper, but he could just make out the words.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
That voice. He knew that voice, but from where?
Greetings from the fire, and from the one you should not have killed.
The one he shouldn't have killed. William thought back. He'd done a lot of awful things, but there was always the one that stood out. Not Charlie, his drunken act of revenge. Not Susie, his first true murder, no. Instead, it was the one that he had lost control with. The one that he had broken beyond repair for no good reason other than because he could. The one that he'd stuffed inside the golden bear that his partner used to wear. Cassidy. They were back, and now they were trying to punish him, to make him suffer like he'd made them suffer. It was almost like William and Cassidy's souls had been locked together, fused by a collective rage and spite, each refusing to move on. But while Cassidy was so focused on taking revenge, they actually did the one thing that would be the downfall for so many others. They kept William alive. Even though fire should have destroyed the remnant that was coursing through his being, Cassidy kept William breathing, paving the way for his escape. William's will was so strong, his soul so powerful that he managed to put a part of himself inside the circuitry that housed the spring-locked suit. And there, his consciousness lay, inside a single circuit board, waiting for someone to find him and set him free. A person that no one would...
It's a Horcrux!
Okay, so a bit of a shorter chunk, but an
He's
important
Voldemort!
perspective. The last two episodes have been about death. The death of Afton's family, the deaths of multiple children, the death of the franchise itself as Mike and Henry figuratively and literally burn it all down. Today's episode, though, and the current end of this franchise, is instead all about rebirth. The return of old characters in new forms, and the controversial rebirth of a franchise entering the next era of its story. Fazbear Entertainment was dead.
There is no need for you to return to work next week, as Fazbear Entertainment is no longer a corporate entity.
All debts had been paid, all assets redistributed. The company was outright dissolved. Even the memories of the horrors that had happened there started to fade away in the public consciousness. The people were gone too. William was dead. Henry was gone. A whole generation of young Emilys and Aftons had lost their lives to the horrors of the pizzeria. All of them collateral damage to the man in the bunny suit. Everyone the company had ever touched was dead and gone. Well, all except one.
Pay your child support, you deadbeats! I'm keeping the diamond ring. I also set the house on fire!
Clara Afton. She'd been there in the early days, back when things with
She's a
William were
name?
good. They'd had the perfect home, a thriving business, the ideal family. But shortly after their youngest son died, things started to change. William had become distant, lost in his work, obsessive. She had watched him change from this irritatingly brilliant man that she had fallen in love with to a drunken monster struggling to hold himself together. And despite her trying to reach out to him in those desperate days, he was just too far gone.
Admit it, you wanted to let me in.
For her sake, she had to leave the relationship, and from there, she largely faded into obscurity. A mystery from William's past, a footnote in his history, and that was fine for her. She wanted to leave that part of her life behind. She tried to move forward, never wanting to hear the name Freddy Fazbear again. A time defined by mistakes and broken promises. But then, the paperwork started to arrive. As Fazbear Entertainment began to close as a corporate entity, suddenly her mail was flooded with notifications, requests, obligations. She had been there since the beginning, helping William in the early days of his business, and now, as a shareholder and sole living member of the Afton family, all copyrights and trademarks of both Afton Robotics and Fazbear Entertainment passed on to her. Memories of this past life that she had long left behind. Looking at the blueprints, the contracts, the memos, she felt old wounds begin to reopen. The regrets of a happy family that had been torn away from her. William had always been brilliant. That's what had attracted her to him in the first place. But he'd also been too blinded by obsession and pride. He was too jealous, too petty, too unable to actually see a bigger picture. But now, holding the paperwork that contained decades of heartbreak and trauma, she realized it was her turn. She was holding the power. This was her chance. And one thought resonated in her head. I will put them back together. I will put them all
Great.
back.
She's crazy
She
too.
would be the one to rebuild
I guess she did marry
rebuild
William Afton.
yeah. Shattered life, to reclaim the kids that Fazbear had stolen from her. But how? Looking at William's work now laid out before her, she knew that he had been onto something, collecting remnant, robotic humanoids, digital conscience transference. The pieces were all in place, they were just scattered, fragmented. It was almost like there were too many ideas going in too many different directions. It was such an important idea that she reiterated that point to herself. There were too
What a
many
meta
ideas
commentary.
going in too many different directions. That said, there had to be a way to save it all. She just needed to put it all back together. But how? To rebuild her family, she would first need to rebuild the franchise that had stolen them away from her. With ownership over the characters, their licenses, the technology patents, and the Fazbear name, she converted the corporation back to an LLC, a structure for smaller businesses that are usually family-owned. The irony was fitting. From there, she would need remnant, and lots of it. Remnant was the key. Clearly, in the later years of his life, William had been using Circus Babies Entertainment and Rental.
She just goes over there and there's containers full of remnant. She's like, oh, alright.
Oh, wow.
But clearly, it wasn't enough.
Obviously, he killed more than just 10 kids.
5 animatronics going out every week?
Yeah, that's true.
It's an idea, but to get the remnant they required, it needed scale. Dozens, hundreds of animatronics, all out there, all gathering remnant from unsuspecting customers. But to do that would require help, something William would
So
never
she's just
have.
sending these robots
William
out to
kept
murder
everything
people, I
in-house.
guess.
His obsession with control limited him. Clara, though, she wasn't nearly that precious. A plan like this required partners, people outside of Fazbear to do the heavy lifting. So she contacted a mid-sized delivery company, DLZ Shipping Solutions, to help build replicas of all the original animatronics. And with meal delivery apps being all the rage, why not an animatronic delivery service? Order one to celebrate your birthday, your Halloween party. How about a 4th of July picnic? We'll invite Liberty Chica and 4th of July Freddy on over. She would make sure that they made skins for every occasion. Chocolate Bonnies for Easter, Shamrock Freddy's for St. Patrick's Day, Dia de los Muertos Chicas. And thus, the Fazbear Funtime service was born.
That's right. With the Fazbear Funtime service,
Rocket Fire.
you'll never be alone again. You'll always have someone watching your back.
Was it ridiculous? Absolutely. Was it a sellout? No doubt. It was exactly the sort of thing that William would
That's
have
cool.
hated.
I'll fuck with it.
Remnant. Normally, the novelty of
I would
ordering
collect those
animatronics wore
things.
off after like what? One? Maybe
They're like
2
Pokemon,
times?
but
Or
creepy.
skins for
Yeah.
the holidays? Suddenly you had yourself an animatronic perfect for every occasion. It would keep people hooked. It would keep them ordering the latest and greatest that Fazbear Entertainment LLC had to offer. And all the while they'd be collecting and returning the remnant back to her. In a word, it was brilliant. There was just one problem with it. No one trusted the Fazbear name. The company's brand was still mud in the public eye. No one would want to hire animatronics.
So name it Bear Faz.
franchise known for murdering children.
Bear Faz Entertainment.
Death, you know. So, she needed to find a way to discredit the stories that had come before. She needed to win back the public's affections, reactivate some nostalgia for the spooky stories of their childhoods. She needed a game. Multiple games, in fact.
They lied to us. They lied to all of us. They told us that the whole point of this VR game was to undo the bad PR done by a rogue indie game developer. But that's not true at all. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up.
Struggling game developers were a dime a dozen online, most working on their magnum opus between shifts at the Dollar General. So she found one. Steve just picked him out of obscurity. The right mix of desperate and doofus.
Pretty sure that's Scott Cawthon.
Do anything for $100, and he fell right in line, as expected, delivering stupid little things with dumb generic names like Mangle's Quest, Balloon Boy's Air Adventure, Five Nights at Freddy's. Bad gameplay with even worse graphics, but hey, they got the job done. People were suddenly talking about the clues inside of these things, searching for the hidden lore. They were
I played that game.
making jokes about dead kids at pizzerias. Her husband's twisted history of serial murder had suddenly been reduced to a mere Nancy Drew mystery to be solved. The plan had worked. Freddy Fazbear's was suddenly more popular than ever. Things were going shockingly well. Her takeover and reboot of the franchise was full and complete. Suddenly infused with cash, she built the largest, most ambitious project yet, the Mega Pizzaplex. William had always been
But this time, we're going to space.
He was careful to a fault. Not her, though. She knew
Pizza
that this
Planet.
project needed to be big. It needed
Man,
to
they
be
need to make that a
flashy.
real
It needed to
place.
be a
That'd be
palace
cool.
for children.
Yeah.
A place that got people talking and checking out the latest in Fazbear products. So with a steady
Makes me
supply
think of a
of
casino.
revenue flowing in, it was finally time. The stage was set. It was time to get to her real goal, literally rebuilding a family. March 2035. The first
Okay,
was
we are in the
obvious.
future.
Her crying child, her little boy, the one that was the first to get ripped away from her. She'd seen
11
down
years
the
from
road
now.
that William had gotten very close to replicating artificial.
How old would she be?
Technology. So that's
Like
exactly what
11?
she would do. Rebuild her boy from the ground up.
Old, I don't know.
This was his wife.
Yeah.
Shirt, even down to small
And he
details
got
that
started
no one
in,
noticed,
well,
like
he
the
saw
beard.
shit from the 30s, so she's
William's research
100 and something.
animatronics that could be
Unless she was way younger than him,
virtually
and
indistinguishable from a typical
That would be
human. He
weird.
would never have any idea of what he actually was unless he was explicitly told. The only things that could possibly ruin the illusion were any overrides to his internal systems. If something were to, say, interfere with the cameras that he had in his eyes, or cause some sort of a core reboot to his hard drive, or x-ray his metallic bones, then yeah, he would be exposed. But otherwise, to the outside world, he was just your typical, normal human boy. She worked down in the bowels of the Pizzaplex, giving him life, but it was one thing to build him. It was another to help him remember his identity. He died so young, so early in their history that there was no preserved memories.
and it
for
was
him,
like
no
50
documentation
years
to
ago.
download into his digital brain. So bit by bit, she trained him, forcing him to remember who he was. In a corner of the room, she even made a makeshift dinner table, a
Ew.
reminder of their happier days. The family recreated 2 brothers, a sister, a father, and the mother at the head of the table.
Roly poly oly.
The
Yeah.
one bringing all
Except
of this to fruition.
spookier.
But his
Yeah.
progress was admittedly slower than she would have liked. At first, he could only communicate through simple ones and zeros, then rudimentary drawings and crude letters. But bit by
Yum.
bit, images of his past life started to come through. Balloons, colors, houses, bears and faces, birthday parties. All for me. Gregory was alive. As the robot boy embraced her, she felt a warmth that she hadn't in decades. This was the joy that she'd been working towards. This was what it was all for. Her son, back in her arms again. The plan was working. She had to keep going. Next was William. If the family was truly going to be put together, she would need him. And she knew exactly where he was, in the ruins of that old Freddy Fazbear's pizza place where Henry had trapped him. In fact, that's specifically why she insisted on building the Pizzaplex there over the sinkhole. It was the best place to hide what her true intentions were with the entire operation. Digging through the wreckage, she found him. He was right where she thought
Ugh.
he'd be. Seeing the putrid shell of the Springtrap suit, though, was not something she was prepared for. The rotting corpse of William Afton was disgusting. Scorched flesh fused into the fur lining.
Still?
Black sockets where eyes were.
That's wild.
A skeleton.
Yeah, it should be a skeleton for sure.
It was just the tangled sinews of a creature that was once called human. How far this brilliant...
And the fact that the suit lasted at all, too. It was a fire. It burned.
Afton was practically
Yeah.
lifeless. The man may not have been able to die, but he was about as close as you could come. And his body would need a lot of reconstruction. Replacement arms and endoskeleton reinforcements were the top priority. Maybe pulled from their new line of glam rock animatronics. She'd have to see if they had any spare Bonnie parts lying around that they could steal. In the meantime, though, she threw the husk that was once her husband into a life support pod infused with aerosolized remnant to help keep him stable. But more important than recovering his body was recovering his mind. In his current state, he was comatose, an empty shell. Severe brain damage starts at temperatures over 108 degrees Fahrenheit. 42 degrees Celsius, and years of repeated fires had burned his brain to goo. Gone was the brilliant, frustrating mind that had drawn her to him in the first place. But she had a plan. Unlike her darling boy Gregory, Afton had found ways to record his consciousness. Fundamentally, the brain is only a series of electrical connections after all, so why couldn't you replicate that in the form of a standard circuit board? In essence, you could create a digital consciousness. And one thing she knew about William, he was nothing if not cautious. A planner. Someone who had backup plans to his backup plans. And sure enough, there it was, buried in piles of old animatronic CPUs, a record of Afton himself. But she needed someone to test it.
Someone was definitely here during the night. It had to have been the client. I mean, they sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves.
Unlike the other games that she'd paid to have made in the past, this one had a different
So he's British.
This wasn't about PR.
Their kids are
It was about getting
British,
William
but she's not.
back up and running, spreading his virus to the
Interesting.
Acknowledge that Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for accidental digital consciousness transference, real-world manifestations of digital characters.
She hired a new developer, Silver Parasol Games, to scan the boards and bring her husband into the system. And because of the immersive nature of VR, William's consciousness would be able to merge with the player, giving him a new body, a new agency. There was just one complication. Afton's hold wasn't as powerful as she had hoped. He wasn't able to gain complete control. The first trial run, Jeremy, was so desperate to escape from his grasp that he sliced his own face off with a paper shredder. Messy. Afton's followers were reluctant, to say the least,
face
but
off
it was
with a
the
paper
second
shredder.
attempt that looked like it had the potential to kill two birds with one stone.
Not easily.
Mrs. Afton
You have to,
wanted a surrogate daughter,
like,
her
it's
darling
like
Elizabeth
sticking a piece of paper in a slit.
Well, yeah,
shreds
but
it.
I used one at work, and you can take the bottom part off. I guess you
Could she
would
have
just...
rebuilt her like Gregory?
Yeah,
Sure, but
I
she
don't know.
decided against it because she
Unless
wanted
it's talking about, like, one of the
human
paper
mother-daughter
cutters.
connection.
It's like
Well, that,
the
and it would be
sword
redundant,
thing.
narratively unsatisfying to have two robot kids in the same family. What can
Doesn't
you
seem
say?
like something
William
that they
had
would...
put a lot of
Well,
tools
I don't
on
know,
the
they
table
might.
for her to use,
We have
and
those
she
at
was
work
planning
too,
on
so I don't
using them
know.
all. Plus, Elizabeth had always been so loyal to Daddy. It was time to give her a second chance, a true choice. And Vanessa seemed to be the perfect candidate to fill the role.
Your dad's name was Bill. Your dad didn't play fair, did he? He used to make your mum look bad in court. He manipulated you. I know your mum after she lost the custody case. I was supposed to be a good girl.
She started as a QA tester at Silver Parasol Games, the VR game development company that was part of her plan to bring back William. But more importantly, Vanessa checked all the correct boxes. Right age, blonde, green eyes with a fondness for flowers and the outdoors. In many ways, it was her daughter all over again. Except it wasn't just looks and personality. What really mattered was Vanessa's mind. Underconfident, coming from a broken home, motherless, able to be manipulated. Yes, she would do nice things. She would be the one to save dear old Daddy, just as the real Elizabeth would have wanted.
I will make you proud, Daddy.
While testing the VR game, William's digital consciousness merged with Vanessa. Oh sure, she fought, fragmenting Afton's code into a series of tapes hidden across the game, trying to do web searches to regain control over her life, but it wasn't enough. She was weaker than Jeremy. She was a thrall that, despite occasional moments of lucidity, had to obey. And with Vanessa, it was a 2-for-1 deal. She was getting a daughter back,
Mind
also bringing her
control
husband one step closer
through
to
a VR.
Just had to make sure that Vanessa was headed the
Wow.
right way. The reborn Gregory was an expert hacker, part of the benefits of being an Afton and a robot. So Clara had him keeping tabs on Vanessa, hacking into her emails and trailing her therapy sessions to ensure the future Elizabeth was falling in line.
Gregory,
If any of the
no.
therapists started to ask too many questions, they were promptly dismissed from their positions. And while Gregory kept tabs on Vanessa's personal life, Mrs. Afton made sure to clear a path for her professionally. With Silver Parasol's collapse at the hands of the Anomaly, she then had the possessed Vanessa bring the contaminated circuit boards to DLZ shipping and the Fazbear Funtime service. More glitches, more Remnant, more Afton. But it was her last move that was the best. In a true masterpiece of poetry, she brought Vanessa over to be Chief Security Officer at the Pizzaplex. A true family tradition to don the hat and badge page, and all it took was a recommendation from the top as well as some emails marked for deletion. Sure, Vanessa didn't have relevant experience for the job, but when it comes directly from the CEO, does it really matter? Husband, son, daughter. A corpse, a robot, a human. All that was left was Michael. Poor, troubled Michael. The boy that killed her youngest. The one that would spend years trying to make his guilty conscience right again. A self-professed protector. While she knew she needed him to complete the family, something told her that the problem had already solved itself. Something had shifted when using Glamrock Freddy to excavate the buried pizza place.
I have been here before. I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I have changed. My friends are here, but I can protect you. I am not me.
Maybe it was the remnant that
I
coursed
not
through
me?
Michael's veins. Maybe it was the spirit of Michael living on as a protector. But he was there, somewhere inside of Glamrock Freddy. She could feel it. And just like that, she'd won. She'd
That's
done
weird.
it. Sure, there were still some kinks to work out, some final brainwashing of Vanessa,
Robot,
some rehabilitation of William.
animatronic,
Finally,
a human that was literally brainwashed through a VR.
Aftons reunited. A happy ending. And that's how it could have ended.
And a
That's how it
corpse.
should have ended. Had it not been for
Yeah.
a few
And a lady that's like 100
For one,
something.
something was just wrong with the pizza place.
Yeah,
Almost
she's
as if
old
the
as
entire
fuck.
building was haunted
That's
and
crazy.
possessed. Puppet plushies hiding on ceilings, behind crates, places that they had no earthly way of belonging. Staff bots with greasy tears down their eyes, acting like they were being puppeteered by some sort of a nightmare. Even their sounds had the echo of nightmares long past.
So they got married in the 50s, according to the timeline, and this is
As long as her husband
80
was around,
years from that.
it too would linger.
Yeah,
Only
that's
now, it wasn't just
crazy.
in one body, but
So
within
she's like 100
the
something.
building itself. She had seen stories of houses built on burial grounds getting possessed by angry spirits, but she'd never assumed that it could be real. Then again, in a world of living spirit metal and mind-controlling glitches, who was she to be so judgmental? The whole thing was
That's so
ridiculous.
weird to
Why
think
would
that
this
she
be
didn't
alive?
even know
She
about
refused
like
to
the
cross.
ghost.
After all, the Pizzaplex was
The
built
ghosts.
over the burial ground of angry spirits, but it was the power cords that finally convinced her that something was wrong. Suddenly, these cords were striped black and white, like the security puppet from generations ago.
Oh.
The very foundations of this place, the materials and wires that constituted it, were rebelling against her, against the Aftons, against the quest to bring them all together again. And it was being helped by something else, something slithering through the building. Maybe they were connected, she couldn't be sure, but a blob of living wires could be heard oozing through the walls, stealing pieces and parts of the old animatronics showcased in Rockstar Row. She could only assume that it was a byproduct of all the remnant they'd been collecting. From Afton's testing, she knew that both light and dark remnant existed, one of positive emotions and the other created from anguish, anger, agony. Perhaps this thing was an amalgamation of all the darkest parts of the pizzeria's
Okay.
history. A collection of the hatred still housed inside these defunct endoskeletons and exosuits. As long as it was left alone, it seemed to be harmless. But if any Afton outside of Michael got too close, it would lash out wildly. Even young Gregory, looking to punish the family that had been complicit in its horrible creation. Little did she know, though, that Gregory should have been her biggest concern. That bringing the family together would have some unforeseen consequences. Gregory was normally the goodest of boys. She had literally built him that way. But lately, he'd been disappearing more and more often, disobeying her orders. Requests. She knew that he loved playing on the arcade machines once the Pizzaplex closed, being so good as to top the leaderboard on practically all of them. But lately, he was nowhere to be found. She suspected his absence had to do with Glamrock Freddy's failed performance the other night, when he malfunctioned live on stage. Almost as though the core programming of Freddy responded to seeing this rebuilt small boy. Almost like it awakened something inside of him. She'd have to make sure that Vanessa was on the lookout for him. But she'd soon come to learn that Vanessa wasn't enough. Whether it was the influence of the nightmare puppet or a reawakened hatred of animatronics seated deep in Gregory's code, something had caused him to rebel. To rip apart each animatronic in the Pizzaplex. Bit by bit, this boy was
But the animatronics were terrified. Get us out of here!
Freeing Vanessa from her mind control, destroying the remains of Afton in the basement, setting Glamrock
They're all in a
Freddy
room
loose
watching
as he
cameras.
carefully
Where's he at?
Yeah.
Where's Gregory at?
one more time, she began to plot her revenge.
It's
She
just
would have
complete
to bring them
reversal.
all to ruin. And there you have it, my friends. Nearly a decade in the making, my FNAF timeline for where the franchise is here in 2023.
And now we watch the movie.